I want you to talk into this, even though there's no PA, because this I'll be able to capture. Okay. Okay. So we've got a funny thing going on here. This is recording for the podcast. This is recording for the live cast. Okay.
Ooh.
So when you see us talking into our microphones, it's not for you, it's for them.
There's millions of people around the world that listen to Suncast. Soon.
Speak it into existence, brother.
Yes. All right, welcome everyone to this very special edition of the Climate Link Meetup. My name is Ravi Mickelson. I'm the host and organizer for Climate Link. We're a network of startups, investors, foundations, all focused on fighting climate change. And we're excited to have Aurora Solar back in the Climate Link mix. 2 years ago, I believe it was, just around this time, we had Chris Hopper, the other co-founder. I'm excited to have Samuel Adeyemo tonight. And met Nico a little while ago, and we said, hey, we should do something together. And he said, I'm going to be in town. I said, okay, well, why don't we do a live recording? Neither of us have done this before, so it's great. Thank you all for coming out. We'll be doing solar for energy access in a few weeks, marine technology in November, and then we'll have a big party and some future-looking technology speaker. So we're on Meetup, so it's meetup.com, and then search for Climate Link. Thank you all, and now I'll pass it over to Nico.
Yeah, you can clap. That was good. Thanks, Robbie. I have, I used to live in the Bay Area. And so we'll start with this. How many of you listened to Suncast already? Woo-hoo. Nice. Who here besides the person I'm going to call out knows why I'm here in this room tonight? Like, does anyone here know who's responsible? No? Raise your hand if you're an Aurora employee who's mentioned Suncast to someone else at Aurora. All right. So someone in that small group is responsible for me being here, and I thank you. I'm not going to call you out by name, but I have had the distinct pleasure of podcasting with some of the industry titans and the up-and-coming industry titans of the solar industry. Names you'd recognize like Jigger Shaw and Dan Sugar and Bernadette Del Chiaro, like folks that are actually getting shit done, right? Folks that we owe our careers to in some way. Adam Browning just recently came on last week. And I've always wanted to do something live, and I've always wanted to work with startups in the industry. I get the opportunity to do that in one go. Yeah. So thanks, Sam, for joining me for this. I know that this is out of his comfort zone, like well out of his comfort zone. So we're going to explore that tonight. And if you've never listened to Suncast, I'm extremely grateful that you're here. If you're an Aurora employee, you can sit down, man. I don't want to make you stand. I'm going to talk for a second.
Thank you.
I'm going to talk for a second. If you've never listened to Suncast, what we try to do is really capture the essence of the entrepreneur. The idea is that it helps individually for you to think about how to grow your career, but also collectively for us to understand how folks that are really making an impact in our industry got their start, what the pivot points were in their career. And at the end of the day, I think probably Elliot, who's a longtime listener, would agree, like it humanizes people that are otherwise on pedestals in our industry, right? Of their own making, of our own making, right? And it gives you insight into things like how Genya Medbury left SunPower and started P-Vel, and sold it and bought it back again, right? Cover that whole story. So it's really been a joy to have this experience, and to have some of you who are fans come alongside, give me feedback and insight. But it's also been really cool when listeners suggest that companies partner. And so many of you, probably even at Aurora, who aren't listeners, may not know that Aurora has been a partner of Suncast for the last little while here, which I'm internally grateful for, because it actually makes this podcast possible. What I'll state here for the record is that tonight, and this recording has absolutely nothing to do with, in any way, the fact that Aurora has been a sponsor or partner. When Robbie and I sat down and said, what would be cool? Just so you have an idea of like who we compared against, right? What would be cool? Andrew Savage at Lime was on the hit list. Trying to think, there was another one over in Oakland. Do you recall?
Well, there was
There were
Bergie.
like 4, huh?
There was Bergie. You threw out,
Yeah.
Lynn Jurek.
Bergie, right, Birchie. Andrew
Bergie.
Birchie, but
Yeah.
Andrew Birch, yeah. Lynn Jurek, Andrew Savage, a couple of Andrews, decided against that. And then I said, well, what about someone in the city, in San Francisco instead of Oakland? And Robbie said, well, Aurora just moved to San Francisco. He doesn't actually listen a whole lot to Suncast. He doesn't have time.
Decent amount.
And it's an hour long, it's a commitment. And I thought, well, that's serendipitous. So we followed that thread, and thankful to Gwen and the team for having us here. How many of you are employees again? Raise your hand. Cool, a fair amount, a little over half. How many of you feel like you have a really good level set understanding of who this man is? Yes, he is enigmatic.
Our
There's
HR director.
enigmatic. The HR director has his hand up. All right.
He has access
Cool.
to the classified.
Fantastic. Well, if I do my job well tonight, and I leave Elliot happy with how well I've done as a comparison, then we'll all know a little bit more about Sam. But more importantly, we'll understand how Aurora Solar fits within the greater battle that we're all in. Right? The energy transition, climate change. If you're here because you're part of the Climate Link meetup, you're implicitly interested in how technology is changing the fight against climate change. And I think that part of the sort of ground zero for that is the type of software that gives us leverage. So we're going to explore that a little bit tonight. I'm going to take a seat because this might take a while. How you doing?
Good.
Good. Let's look good. Got the audio checking in here. I did an audio check, and Sam unwittingly told me exactly how to get to his house. So
That's okay. There isn't much there.
I have it recorded. There isn't much there because he lives here.
Not much they know.
6.5 years, right?
6.5 years since we were formally incorporated, yes. Yeah. A few more years if you talk about when we got started. Yeah.
Well, for those who are unfamiliar, Sam, or Samuel, as he is named, Adeyemo, is co-founder and chief operating officer at Aurora Solar. Aurora is a software platform used to design more than 80,000 solar projects per month around the world. Is Chris here? I've never seen Chris.
Oh, really?
So no. So co-founder is not here.
Yeah.
He's out saving the world in other ways. Aurora, before founding Aurora, Sam was vice president in JP Morgan's chief investment office. We'll talk a bit about that tonight. And he famously went to U Chicago with another set of solar software designers that shall remain unnamed for this interview. But sounds like U Chicago and graduate school are good to those who would want to start solar software programs. Just saying, if you're out there and you're thinking about where you want to go to undergrad, or if you want to do Harvard or Stanford, maybe Stanford. Sam's had a fabled journey to get into solar software. But I'd rather, instead of me telling the story, Sam, would you do us a favor and help us understand that first moment where you realized that there was life outside of banking, and that there was a world of clean energy, and it was something that you really just thought that you could spend the next 10, 15, 20 years of your life in?
All right. Well, first of all, before I begin, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for choosing Aurora as the location of your Climate Link Suncast podcast. We're honored to have you, so thank you very much for being here. And also a special thank you to Gwen and all the people who turned around from SBI and made this happen. It's a great turnout. Yeah, sure. Yes, thank you. All right. So when did I realize that I would want to spend the next 10, 15, 25 years of my life focused on clean energy? Well, first of all, I didn't realize it would be that long. I still am not sure it will be that long, but I think that for me, between working at JP Morgan in finance and starting Aurora, there was grad school in between. And grad school was a time to explore different ideas, to just basically, try and find out like what's most important to you, why it's most important to you, what kind of things you want to do for the rest of your life. When you're starting out in undergrad and so on and so forth, you kind of do what you're told, at least I did, and followed more of the traditional path. And I was like, okay, what are the things I really care about? And when I was looking at that, I knew I wanted something that would be really important, that would have a significant impact on society, on the world. And clean energy just fit a number of interests for me. Number one, I loved the end outcome in terms of you're doing something that's really good for society and also at an individual level. Before we started focusing on software, we're actually doing installations. When I say we, I'm referring to me and my co-founder, Chris, who isn't here right now. But
You guys were at Stanford together?
yes, we were in grad school at Stanford.
Were you roommates?
We were not technically, no, we were not. Technically or not technically, we're not roommates, but we met very early in the program, probably, I think it was like first quarter. He claims we met in orientation. I didn't remember him.
So you were clearly memorable in orientation.
Well, anyway. He's not here to defend
That's right,
himself.
he's not here.
So I'll let that contentious story rest. But long story short, we met very early in grad school, probably around the first week of the first quarter, and just started talking about things. I had come from a finance background, looking at doing something different. He had come from a background where he was working with off-grid electrification solutions. So he had co-founded this charity that had powered, basically they built hardware and other solutions and came up with an economical model where they could provide electricity to a lot of rural homes in sub-Saharan Africa and in India. And when we're talking about it, he said, yeah, we powered something like 600 homes. That was really cool because I was like, well, these are small systems, just a light bulb or in some cases, maybe enough to charge cell phones and so on and so forth, but it was a pretty transformative impact. So that was really cool. But then, I thought, I love that. And then I got the finance side of mine. And I said, well, can we make this bigger? Can we turn this into something that was beyond a charity, et cetera, et cetera? And that's when we started batting around the idea of, well, what if we did actual solar installations in emerging markets? So I'll pause there because maybe I'm heading off track from the questions you asked. The short answer to your question is, when did I first realize? This is tough to admit, but I first fully realized when I met Chris and we started talking about some of the cool things we could build together.
Yeah. So we mentioned before that.
You said this is live, right?
It is.
So there's no chance to take that back.
No.
It's going to hold that over me for a while.
That's quite all right. So one thing that's really interesting actually about doing live is if you've listened to Suncast for a while, I even say often it's highly edited, and it's highly edited. And if you didn't know that, I'm sorry to spoil it for you. But this, what I'm talking about now, is an aside, right? And it will be edited out when you listen to this in its live, in its actual recorded format on the show.
Okay.
It won't. We can, in fact, edit things out. But it's amazing how pregnant a pause is in a conversation, and how it can draw out communication. So if we're quiet for a while, I'm thinking, and Sam is growing in tension. Okay, and it's good for all of us. Just want to set the stage there because I didn't say that before. Let's back up just a little more.
Mm-hmm.
You are 16, 17, first coming to the United States?
Roughly.
From your birth country of Kenya to Chicago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you stay home for college?
It's a very easy question. University of Chicago, they gave me a scholarship. It was a really good school. I knew I wanted to study economics. I'd seen the potential of economics to transform lives. When you grow up in an emerging market, anytime the IMF comes out and says something, it actually changes the public discourse. It could affect like the currency, all sorts of stuff. So it was like, wow, those guys have a lot of power. So I wanted to learn the kind of dark arts that were economics at the time.
It's kind of interesting because you're engaged in some dark arts in the solar industry right now.
I like to not think that.
Yeah.
I think I'm on the light side now.
You are on the light side.
Yeah.
However, you're now creating complex algorithms to address world problems, and that's admirable. When we discussed the period that you guys were exploring how you wanted your sort of mini business that you were thinking about inside of Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the moment where you and Chris realized that the solution had become the product, or rather the product had become the solution? I think you know what I'm referring to.
I think what you're referring to is that, so we met and we're talking a bit about like, hey, what are some things we can do? This is cool technology. It has a good impact, but how can we grow this up? How can we do this at a scale that justifies all of our efforts and makes the kind of impact that we would like? Mm-hmm. And so our answer to that question was, okay, we're going to install solar in emerging markets. Okay. And that was what we set out to do, not really knowing much about what that meant. Again, there's a common theme here. That's a good idea. So,
and by emerging market, you were principally focused on the African subcontinent, or?
We actually looked all over,
okay.
But then at some point you have to narrow it down.
Yep.
And so, but by emerging markets, coincidentally, what you're looking at with solar is you're looking at areas that have the right climatic conditions. You're looking at people who have poor alternatives to what you're providing with solar. So in that case, it was reliable, cost-affordable electricity.
Yep.
So a lot of emerging markets, maybe that's part of the reason they are emerging, tend to have those common characteristics. In this particular case, we honed in on Kenya, and we sent out a bunch of flyers to a bunch of different locations there. And the flyers basically said something to the effect of, would you like clean, affordable energy at a lower cost than what you have, right? And it's kind of like, yeah, why not, right? Mm. And so from there, we narrowed it down to, okay, these are sites that look like they could be a good fit. Looks like they could actually afford to pay for it, et cetera, et cetera. And then once we narrowed it down to about one site, we actually went through the process of designing a solar installation for them. And that was really when a lot of the pain began. And there was a lot of it, 6+ months of nights and weekends, meeting up, trying to design a system for halfway across the world from our dorm rooms in Palo Alto.
Were you working,
like you want to ask?
Yeah, were you working through someone locally that you had a trust relationship with? Or how did you establish a communication line?
Not really. I mean, before, well, I guess Upwork and things like that were a thing, but it was...
So it wasn't like working with your cousin back in Kenya, or
no, not at all. No, I'd never met these folks. So what we did was we found some people who would go out there and take a survey.
Yeah.
And so they would take pictures of the
literally
site,
on
take
Upwork,
measurements.
you found people who would.
In this case, I'm not sure if it was Upwork, but it was on. It was one of these platforms. It may have been like reaching out, but it was someone who had never met before.
Got it.
And he's great because he still works on. His name's Steven. But in any event, we hired him to go and do these surveys and to take a bunch of pictures and to take measurements of this location. And he got all the information, right? And would send it back to us. And so we got all of this initial information and started designing a solar installation. We found that we didn't have all the information we needed. We had to ship over a bunch of like data loggers so that they could install it. And we just got reams and reams and reams and reams of data. And what you're trying to do with all of this data is come up with a solution. Not even we started out trying to come up with an optimal solution, but pretty soon you converge on, let's just find something that works. And something that works is something they can afford, something that will reduce their current electric bill, something that will be reliable, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the better part of 6 months, nights and weekends. And then for our summer, we actually flew down there. We had to raise a loan, find people who would actually pay for the equipment, pay for a ship that would travel to the site and deliver our equipment. What we ended up designing was a 50 kW, 3,500 amp hour, 48 volts for all of the energy geeks out here, quasi off-grid system. And everything was planned out, everything was perfect, it was going to fit on top of this building, and we knew exactly where it was going to go. And actually, originally it was going to be a ground mount. Yeah. You know, we had like this area that they had cleared out and everything. And we arrived there and we find they had started digging a foundation. So I had to figure out how to convert this from a ground mount to a roof mount system. And I think that was the beginning of the end of, hey, we're going to create a solar city for emerging markets. Right. Concept. Yeah. And so basically, to your question, which was like, how did the product become the solution?
Yeah.
Right. The product became the solution because it became clear to us if we wanted to do many of these type of projects, if we wanted to do many of these type of installations, we'd need better ways to do that. We'd need better software, better tools. And so the first versions of Aurora were for us internally to enable us to do more of these solar installations. And by the time we had another year, in my case, it was a year and a half. I was doing a degree program. So another year and a half of school, it became pretty clear software was our solution.
That notwithstanding, this is still just a school project. And as we talked a bit offline, coming out of JP Morgan, going into Stanford, it's easy to say the yellow brick road was paved before you. You could pluck any apple from any tree as a banking grad from Stanford, yet you've chosen the not so terribly easy path of developing a software for a solar startup or for the solar niche to begin with. I think
a lot of companies are just school projects, right? Like yeah. Google was an assignment.
Certainly.
Dropbox was initially something. So yeah. I mean, I don't think that's most of the people I know. Like, I don't think that's too uncommon. And I think that that's something that for a lot of people who are hopefully listening or out there in the audience, it doesn't have to be this grand, design with everything all planned in. It's just following your interests and seeing where it goes. And then once you hit on a vein, doubling down on that. Some people do come up with a whole plan ahead of time, but I think for a lot of people, it is just a project.
Yeah. So allow me to play a little bit devil's advocate. You have a lot of opportunity. You could consider this a project that was just too hard. And yet you could still be committed to climate change and attacking that as a problem. People at Resnick are attacking the same problem. People at Climate Bank will be attacking the same problem. Why then is this software path your chosen tip of the spear to attack climate change, to fight this macro problem that you believe is where you should invest your career?
It ended up being that, right? Originally, it was actually installing the systems. And then what we realized was if you're going to do this in any sort of scalable, deployable, way, right? If we had so much pain, and granted, it was exacerbated by the fact that we were halfway across the world. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't have money. All of these things exacerbated it and made it a little bit more difficult. But at the end of the day, it became very apparent to us that, hey, look, if you actually want to do this at scale, it was pretty logical that you'd need this solution. So I think probably the tougher part for us was there were a couple of follow-on projects. And at some point, it's like, okay, this is working. This is cool. But then if you do 2, 3, 4, 5, you can do that. But what if you need to do 1,000 in a year? Or
Right.
what if you want to do, we have some clients that do tens of thousands of solar projects a year. You would need some sort of software solution, and there weren't any good solutions on the market at that time. So we took what was being incubated and turned it into its own product. I think it was at that point for us, given where we were in the whole value chain and ecosystem, just blindingly obvious.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's kind of the story of Slack, right? It's kind of one of those things where you just look internally and you're like, wait, we developed this tool that's helping us, and it can help so many more people, right? That's fascinating.
I think we'll have the same outcome.
Very good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it. Yeah. Well, we haven't yet had, have we, solar unicorn? So we're on our way.
Okay.
What for you has been easier than you expected getting this company off the ground?
Nothing.
What's been harder than you expected? And then everything is not acceptable.
What's been harder than I expected? Well, we were very much the type to like, hey, listen, get your head down and work. So especially now that people are like, well, we want to hear how you did it, your story, so on and so forth. These kind of things have been a little bit harder because it's like, I'm not used to it. I'm not used to talking about like, well, this is what we did. I would advise, you guys come along and do things the same way. So that's been a little bit harder. But let's see, aside from that, what else has been harder?
I'll ask it a different way. Is there a particular sacrifice that comes to mind that you had to make to achieve what you've achieved so far?
Is there a particular sacrifice you've had to make? Well, you started off with the joke of maybe you live here, and everyone kind of chuckled until I looked at them, and then they. So there's a little bit of that. You do end up having to put in quite a bit of time and a lot of hours. So those are things that you could obviously be doing otherwise. You spend a lot of time thinking about like a team and what are the best ways to make them more efficient, happier. Are they happy? Are they not happy? So, those are things that you end up spending a lot of time thinking about. And that would be another thing that's harder because you just kind of expect like, oh, well, we put things in motion and, everything will flow from there. But yeah.
Is there anything in particular you can think of that you feel like you had to trade?
Had to trade. A salary.
Yeah.
I mean, like, let's be honest. I was a VP in the chief investment office of JP Morgan. That's like the SWAT team of traders who get put there. So doing that to a shoestring budget, especially initially, is a common path that any founder goes through, and any of the initial folks. That's not the case now. Am I allowed to say we're hiring?
Of course.
Okay, we're hiring, so don't worry. We're very competitive now, but in the early days,
we're going to talk about exactly why you're hiring.
Yeah, exactly. But in the early days, that was an obvious sacrifice. And I mean, other than that, I really see it as a pleasure and a privilege. Like, I never think like, oh, I wish, or I'm sad, or I'm unhappy. Are there times like, oh, I wish I had a bit more time, or I felt like, I got more sleep, or, I could do more? Yeah, sure. But overall, I just feel so fortunate and so lucky to be doing something that is meaningful, that at least so far is working, and their prospects for it to grow much bigger. Like, that's actually pretty exciting every day. So I don't consider it, as too much of, a sacrifice.
As a software provider to the industry, are there certain things that you have to deliver in order to survive?
Yes, there are a lot of things that you have to deliver in order to survive. You have to stay true to what the value of your software is, right? So in the case of Aurora, we say that we are the most accurate and most comprehensive way to design residential and commercial solar installation. And that's always been the case. So we really focused on being accurate, like making sure that you can really precisely forecast how many solar panels will fit on a property, calculate how much energy it will produce, and predict how much money it would save your clients. That's what every solar professional needs to do. And we wanted to be able to do it for anywhere in the country, other parts, so that if we went back to do that same installation again, it would be much faster. So you just need to make sure you nail that, like get that absolutely right. And that's what the entire team, especially on the product and engineering side, have been focused on. And then from there, especially as of earlier this year, one of the things we like to say is that, and we also provide the best service. You know, we have like a big team here, and they're really focused on your needs and everything else. And there, you know, that is also a lot of the value proposition we provide. It isn't so much software, but it is part of what you'd expect with Aurora. So, yeah, those are things that keep you up at night.
How do you provide the best service?
Best people.
Are they available 24/7?
They can be. If you're the right client. And if they're not, I will be.
Yeah.
So there you go. Yeah. Actually, you know, earlier you started off by saying we design over 80,000 solar projects. That must have been an old slide because we're now over 100,000. So when you think of the amount of volume that's flowing through, yes, 24/7 support, not only like accessibility, but also quality, so that if someone has a question, you have someone who's actually trained and has a good background in solar who could address it.
Yeah.
Those are some of the things we look for.
I've been in the industry for 14 years. I started designing systems quite literally in Excel.
Yeah.
This is like, it's laughable, but
Yeah.
one of the guys who taught me how to do solar would take Excel and he would bring it down to 1 square by 1 square.
Yeah.
And he would draw a rectangle of the roof.
Yeah.
Like, this is how we did it in 2006.
Some people still do it that
I
way.
know, exactly.
We actually just signed up someone who used to do that before, and when I told that story, I don't think people believed me. But yeah.
I learned on my own TurboCAD in 2007.
Okay.
And then I found the amazing and wonderful, fabulous world of DC power systems and AEE, where really, really good engineers would, for free, design all my projects.
Okay.
So that was fantastic. And then along comes Andy Black and his service. And I was out of the industry on the residential side for a long time when companies like Aurora came along. So when I began teaching a class on how to develop a solar project on the resident commercial side, I discovered through YouTube this product called Aurora that I didn't know existed.
Oh.
And I remember getting up on the roof with a sun eye,
Yeah.
right? Not any of the newfangled products that you have that are digital, right? The sun eye and drawing the shade.
Yeah.
And running, I mean, I watched this YouTube video and I thought, this is magic. I don't know, like what sort of, what does it take to get to this level of software and integration? And I used that video of Aurora in my classes for a long time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I didn't know anything about your proposal tool or anything else. I just said, this is how it used to be, and this is how it now is, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is the future,
Yeah.
and the future is now.
Yeah.
Why did you start with residential instead of a more comprehensive sort of approach to the industry? Was there something?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let me try to think back to when we were making that decision.
Because your first project, I'll note, was commercial.
Yeah, it was. It was. It was commercial, but it had a pitched roof. So in some ways it looked, well, eventually it ended up having a pitched roof. So it was kind of
Well, I
residential
wonder as you pontificate, I mean, Helioscope started as commercial.
I won't pontificate, I'll just
Sure.
think.
As you think about the appropriate start, Helioscope started commercial. And I in truth don't know why they started in commercial. It just occurs to me, like, I wonder why Aurora started with residential, given there were already software trying to address residential design. And there were software that came along.
Which one was trying to desk? Residential design?
In truth, I can't name them.
Yeah. So that's what we found, right? Like, there were things that kind of existed and they kind of touched on parts, but nothing that really tied together the solution where you felt like, hey, look, I can confidently design something for this location and be confident in the results. So, the reason we started off in residential were twofold. One, the whole idea was that we want thousands of different projects, right? Like tens of thousands of solar installations, to be empowered and enabled. And when you looked at the soft costs, like the cost of like the site visit and everything relative to the overall cost of a system, in a residential project, it was astronomical. If it was a utility scale project, just to take the other extreme, then yes, you could afford to spend a bunch of time and go travel out there and take measurements and so on and so forth. But even there are now software solutions that are focused on that. But when we were looking at like the ratio of soft cost to overall costs in residential, it seemed like that was most apparent. So that was one reason. The other reason is that just the core IP and the core technology that we developed just fit really well for residential. Like it's pretty cool. You draw something, you get a 3D model. It looks a lot more impressive when you have all of these different like roof facets. And if you think of the sun eye that you said, where you got on the roof, I'm guessing most of the time that was for residential projects, right?
For both.
Oh, for both?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which meant that you were taking sometimes 30, 50 data points,
Oh, wow.
individuals. So that was miserable.
Yeah.
No, we were doing mostly commercial back when I had my solar company. You mentioned being sort of bootstrapping.
Mm-hmm.
You're not bootstrapping anymore. Congratulations. How did you initially fund the business, and how long did you think that you would have a runway?
Quasi-bootstrapping, in that we had about $1 million worth of funding, and that carried us for the first 4 or 5 years.
That was like friends and family?
No, we did have some professional investors. Yeah, I don't think there were any friends and certainly no family. Actually, no, that's not true. There was a friend. But it was friends, Angel, and one VC, Pair Ventures. They're
that was
fantastic.
Pair?
Yeah, that was Pair Ventures. They're fantastic.
So Pair came in your angel round?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. From day one, they came in the angel round, gave us office space,
oh, cool.
So on and so forth. So.
At what point did it become clear, and under whose guidance did you decide it's time for the Series A?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we raised our Series A earlier this year. And at what point did it become clear? We got to the point where the company was about 40, 50 people. And at that point, we just had to decide, well, what do we want to do with this, right? Like, is this something where we're trying to build a platform that could be the operating system of the industry, which is our ambition? If that was the case, it just became clear we would need more capital. We needed more people because there's so many things we had to build. We needed that whole services side of things, right? The support side. And ultimately, you just need that buffer. Like, big companies want to know that whoever they're partnering with will be around, for a while. And we do as well. So when we looked at all the investments we had and we looked at like, all right, we've got this far and we could continue that way. But at the end of the day, we want all these solar projects, every solar project to pass through our platform and be better off for it. You'd need more capital.
Yeah. And
so that was, it wasn't an easy decision. It took a couple of months to decide. Let's see, that was probably about a year ago. No, about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
We were like, okay, we think that this is something that we definitely should do. And then from there, we had to talk about execution.
And Pair led the Series A along with Energize.
Pair participated.
Okay.
They, at least they're changing now, but they were a smaller fund
at
that point, so they wouldn't lead the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You raised a massive Series A. 20 million is by any standard in the solar industry,
Yeah.
and by most standards in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
A big Series A raise.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Where did that number come from? And how in the world did you accomplish that in a year?
Where did that number came from? Well, came from the investors.
Well, tell me how you found. Tell me how. So Pear was part of your angel round. We've got Energized and A28.
S28 Capital and Fifth Wall Ventures. Yeah.
Was it as Silicon Valley as TV would have us think this whole process is?
It's funny. I hadn't watched that episode in Silicon Valley, but when I did, I'm not sure I laughed or cried because it just seemed like so real. But it in some ways it was. I think that I guess the question is how did it proceed? How did we get to this number, et cetera, et cetera?
What crazy stories do you have along the way? Anything you want to throw in there? We'll jump along for the ride. Retail.
I'm waiting to get to like the 2 or 3 year mark after the fundraise so that I could one day say, 5 things I learned from raising money. So I haven't got that yet, but I do think that one thing I've learned so far is don't talk too much about it because you could get in trouble. But as far as like interesting stories that materialized, yeah, I think
all of those are going to be edited out. It's okay.
Well, no, I think I'll save that for just you and me over a beer sometime.
But that's exactly what Suncast is about.
You and me at a beer.
That's right.
8,000
That's right.
I think that what was really interesting was actually seeing our evolution over the process, where we started out saying that, hey, look, we've got this thing, it's great. At the time, I think. Our software was being used to design 40 or 50,000 solar projects a month. And us pitching what we could become, and then hearing it reinforced and then incorporating, because sometimes you go and say, hey, we could do this. And then, the investor would say or the potential investor, well, what about this and this and this and this? It's like, oh, that's great. I haven't actually thought about that. And you incorporate that into the pitch and going forward. But I mean, there's so anyone who's raised capital goes through a tough time. Almost anyone. You get shut down so many times.
Yeah.
There are people you've prepared meticulously for, and they'll be like, okay, so tell me again about the plumbing industry. And you're like, I don't really know that much about plumbing, but let me tell you about solar.
Right.
I just see it as part of the process. Were there funny stories? Yes. Will they remain private? Probably yes.
Fair enough. So back to the number, you talked a lot about the investment being geared towards growing the staff.
Mm-hmm.
How has, since February, the vision grown about the investment and the scale that you want to achieve?
Mm-hmm. One thing, going back to this dream of one day saying a couple of things I've learned. One thing is pretty clear is that money doesn't write code, money doesn't sell product, money doesn't support customers, right? So the fact that you have the money in the bank, how the vision has grown is really focusing on what type of culture and team do we want to build to execute on all of these things. And so how has the vision grown? The vision's still the same. You raise the money to effectuate the vision, not to create it.
Yeah.
So that hasn't changed, but what has changed is the urgency with which to accomplish that. So that's been a big change, right? So it's not like, oh, you raise money and it's like, now I can relax. It's the opposite. It's like, oh, this old, nice, leisurely place we were on where we could build a product as we needed, so on and so forth. Now there's a lot of pressure to accelerate things.
Apart from signing and seeing the closing docs and maybe that first transfer, what was your favorite moment from the roadshow and the process?
Probably the favorite moment was, you're spending a lot of time out there pitching to people, and telling them about your story, your vision, and they kind of have to play this somewhat disinterested but kind of interested kind of appeal, and then when you get to the point and you say like, okay, well, are you in or are you out, and they all of a sudden there's this flood of interest, and that's kind of like, oh, so all this time you were bluffing. But that was a nice moment, and that's part of how it ended up being bigger than anticipated. But I remember the time when we finally closed. Me and Chris just looked at each other. We were exhausted. There was nothing to say. Just gave each other a big hug.
Yeah.
And then we just walked out here and acted like nothing had happened because we had to just go back to work.
Day.
It was a normal day. We were waiting to tell everybody together.
Yeah.
And so we had to just kind of stay quiet for the rest of the time, and then at our all hands say, all right, so this is what went on, and we did this, and we released this feature, this. Oh, and by the way, there's an announcement. We just raised. Yeah, and everyone was like, what? Are you serious? Yeah, so that was really exciting. Yeah.
Job security.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Who was here when that happened in February? You remember that day? Yeah? Is that the first thought, job security? No.
If anything, there's probably more job insecurity now. But, not for them.
Yeah.
Leadership. But.
So it's a lot of change.
Okay.
It's a lot of change, right? And as you scale, and you guys are growing rapidly, there's a lot of change. But Bezos, as one of our iconic founder entrepreneurs, likes to focus on a question when he's going after a specific market, and he makes his staff included in all their presentations, and that is answering the question, what's not going to change. So with regard to Aurora, with regard to solar, as you think about the scale that you want to achieve, what's not going to change?
I think you can look at it at multiple layers. At the most basic front, what's not going to change are characteristics that are similar to other industries, right? Like, people always want it to be more affordable. They'll want it to be faster. They'll want it to be easier in terms of the end product, right? So those are clients. So that's not going to change. And the question is, how will we get there? Our focus is on solar, obviously. So what we do is focus on, hey, look, people, in order to make solar cheaper, we need to make soft costs a smaller portion of the overall cost. So what are soft costs? Customer acquisition costs, financing costs, design costs. And we focus really heavily on the design side of things. What can we do to help reduce customer acquisition costs, right? Like that's something that we've been working on and thinking about and working on a product for a long, long time that we'll be launching next year. So what are some of the tools that we can bring? Like, the proudest accomplishment that I think Chris and I have made is really bringing so many talented people to work on problems they otherwise wouldn't have. And the things that they would do is, all right, people are going to want it cheaper. Let's focus on customer acquisition costs. Why is it more expensive? How can we lower that? How can we make our customers, who at the end of the day are solar professionals, the real heroes, boots on the ground, out there pitching solar, installing solar, how can we make them more effective? And those are the things we focus on. And once you focus on that, it actually makes a lot of the decision making of what to build next or how to market something or what to support relatively straightforward.
When you think of the term successful, it could be solar, it could be more broadly climate change as a category, what or who comes to mind for you? What's the standard bearer?
Actually, quite a few people. I think you're quite successful, right?
Thank you.
Like, how did you start Suncast?
I started Suncast. How did I start Suncast?
Yeah.
Episode 100 answers that question.
Okay.
I started Suncast out of a desire to learn more from folks like Marco Garcia, who came before me and knew a whole lot about Latin America.
Mhm.
And I really wanted to be better at being a project developer.
Mhm.
Not better than anyone else. I want to be better in and of myself. So I started Suncast as a clever way to open the door to thought leaders in our industry and get insight from them.
And now, how many podcast downloads a month?
We're coming up on 200 and 4 years.
Okay. And how many subscribers or downloads per month?
It's about 8,000 a month. Yeah, we've
huge.
cleared 150,000 total downloads for Suncast.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to turn it on you, but basically, when I hear about success or think about success, it's you have a personal ambition, a goal, a vision, and then you go out there and you pursue it and you execute on it and you accomplish it, or you learn something in the process. I think of that as being success. I could point to any number of leaders, but the reality of the matter is I haven't been privileged enough to understand their day-to-day. So I'm just reading, and I would just mention the same sort of people that anyone would out there.
Yeah.
But for me, it's kind of hearing these type of stories.
I should turn our Suncast interviews into a book then, if that's what you want to study.
I'll buy it.
Yeah. I'm curious if there is as you sit on a Sunday thinking about the week ahead, what does success for that week look like? How do you continually set the bar for yourself?
For me, so sitting on a Sunday,
or a Saturday, since you never stop working.
Well, seriously, for me, I used to do this on a weekly basis. Now I do it on a monthly basis, and every month I have 2 things that I absolutely must get done that month, right? Like, come hell or high water, these 2 things must be resolved. Everything else could, fall apart. And I won't stop till I get that done. So if on Sunday, as I'm planning for the week ahead, you can imagine there are a lot of competing things. If by Sunday I've whittled down my list of about 200 things to 2 things and said that these are the most important ones, and I feel good about that, then for me, that's actually success, because we're now at the point where prioritizing and figuring out like what to spend most of your time in is one of the bigger challenges.
So we've known for about a month now that we were going to do this. What was the other thing on your list for September?
The other thing on my list for September was that we're in the process of growing the team.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of things that needed to be put in place, because you can just add people, but then you want to make sure that we have this saying here, it's the best place for the best people. So there were a couple of things to do on that front. And I have a little bit more time to get that done. Yeah. But this actually was one of the things that was important.
Thank you. What are some key lessons or takeaways from the important mentors in your life? And I would think as you consolidate here, think about not just maybe professors or high school teachers, but also investors, folks that have taken you aside and said, hey, this, and then they sort of dispel wisdom on you, right? Or maybe it was a boss at JP Morgan that time and time again, they had this one common theme that they ingrained in you, and that has become a guiding principle for you.
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind, and this just has to do with basically the importance of getting started. Put all the plans in place, but actually going out there and doing something. And I was sharing this with some of the team members the other day, and I had this mentor who used to say to me things like, I would tell him all of these plans, and I hope to do this and have this impact, and so on and so forth. And he'd basically say, like, look, if you want, he was full of great sayings, but one of the ones I liked was he would say that, look, if you want to be Arnold Schwarzenegger, you're not going to get there by reading books on nutrition. Just go to the gym, right? And his whole idea was like, just go out there and do something.
Yeah.
Like practice at the thing that you're looking to get good at. And so many times, we'll plan, we'll strategize, and we'll try and craft like the best approach. But at some point, you just have to go do it, right? Like try it, see what happens, learn from it, adjust. And that's something that I've found to be very useful for me throughout my career.
Yeah, the power of the start.
Yeah.
Yeah. Apart from being the chief commercial officer, chief operating officer, apart from developing a software company and being a startup entrepreneur, what are you most fanatical about?
I actually still do solar installations for fun when we can. We've done some in like Congo and tried to do some in other countries. So that isn't part of the software itself or the main business. That's more just a passion project to a certain extent. Let's see, general hobbies. I love track and field. As a sport, because it's something that people like. I think that athletes in that space are a lot more humble. It's a lot harder. You can be a regular person and be an athlete at the same time. I wasn't very good at it, but I liked it. So I love sports.
So are you more like javelin toss or triple jump?
Neither of the above.
What do you lean towards?
I like probably more the track type events. Yeah.
Okay,
if
speed.
it was, like speed. Yeah.
Momentum.
Like those. Yeah.
Repetition.
Simple.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Similarly, perhaps it's charades or parallel parking, but what are you the terriblest at?
Parallel parking. Driving in general.
Driving in
Yeah,
general.
all those years in
You
New
live
York did
close
nothing.
by, so you don't have to think about it.
I do. I moved. Once we moved, I kind of moved with the office.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to drive. So I last Christmas I had to drive from like DC to New York, and it was terrifying. A couple of close calls.
Obviously, you guys are sitting at the intersection of growth for our industry. Companies depend on the software that you provide so that they themselves can grow. There are a few other places in our industry, apart from perhaps lead gen companies, that can truly take credit for giving companies scale. What has you most excited right now for growth in our industry? And you can't say Aurora Solar.
Okay, yeah, I'll exclude Aurora. I think that I think that next year or two could be some of the most phenomenal years for the industry. When I look at, so when I was in my previous life, which is many, many years ago, almost a decade ago now, but in the chief investment office, one of the things that you eventually were asked to do is look at the world, look at the markets, and think about like where the bank itself should be making bets or investments or things like that. And when I look at all the factors that are in place for solar, I'm just so excited. I think it's just going to absolutely blow people's socks off. Like how big this will become. I think that you have the macro factors of the fact that interest rates are going down again, right? And many times people get loans to get solar, so that means that it's cheaper for them effectively. Things like the inflation that would affect utilities are going up. Their cost bases are going up. So that means that the alternatives to clean energy are going up.
Right.
People are becoming more and more aware. Next year in California, we have the California solar mandate, which is going to turn like every new home into a billboard for solar.
Right.
And people will be talking about it, and opinions will be mixed, right? Like they are now. Some people are for it, against it on both sides of the political spectrum. But just by virtue of the fact that people start talking about it, people will start saying, I wonder what this is or how it may work for me. So when I look at all of those factors combined, I just think, and we're also going into what a lot of people think will be a slowdown in the economy.
Right.
And when you're slowing down in the economy, most of the time you think about, how am I going to save money?
Yeah.
Right? Less than, maybe solar wins out versus kitchen renovation, right? Because this will actually save you money versus, improving your live. I don't know. Why do people renovate kitchens? But you know, like,
Because
but
it's the single best return on your money for resale.
okay, so there you go, right? So maybe they're more defensive. Yeah, you know, they're laughing at me. I renovate my microwave, but anyway, in any event, like my overarching point is that I think that a lot of the macro conditions right now are really set for solar to take off. I think it's very exciting, not just for Aurora, but for anyone who's in the industry. I think that it's going to be a much bigger player. And it's going to be because of the work of thousands of, you know, what we call truck in a truck,
Yeah.
right? Companies, as well as the big nationwide firms.
Yeah.
So I think it's an exciting time to be in solar, and I feel like everything that we've been through, the tariff situation, everything else, we just went through it first, and we've learned and adapted, and the next couple of years, I think, will be really, really good. We'll exceed all the forecasts that you're seeing from a lot of the research shops in terms of what it'll mean for solar.
If you could give advice to, we're going to make it age indiscriminate, someone who's transitioning into the solar industry right now and looking for a job, what would that be?
Well, first of all, congratulations. I think that you're on the right track and look at the right thing. Second of all, I would say that it's really important as much as possible to educate yourself, right? Unfortunately, not only in solar, this is common in any industry. There are a lot of, you know, excuse my French, idiots just running around, right?
Yeah.
Like, so you want to make sure you're not one of them. Yeah, exactly, right. You know, you want to educate yourself on like what does it mean and everything else. So
Yeah.
I would advise listening to Suncast, right? Like reading Green Tech Media, reading Solar Power World. We try and put out a lot of really great content on our blog.
Indeed, there was a very good blog recently.
Yeah, absolutely.
My friend Conrad Chase.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's right. So that was a lot of great work that Gwen and the marketing team here does. But just, you know, first of all, congratulations. Second of all, educate yourself, right? And then third of all, to the advice that someone gave me once, which is that after you've educated yourself, don't stop there. You have to just go do it, right? Like volunteer with Grid Alternatives or there's another one locally, Sunworks, or some of these other organizations, so you can get some practical experience. And once you have that underneath your belt, you've done all three of those things, call us.
Yeah.
Go to our website, because we definitely are looking for people who put in their work. Yeah, yeah. Or others.
Yeah.
That was tongue in cheek.
Well, I'm curious, how do you educate yourself and keep sharp or ahead of your peers? What resources do you regularly return to?
Those same ones, actually. Yeah. Those are on my bookmark list. Those and other industry publications.
It's okay, we don't need to please anyone here.
No, okay. And I think because I still have that finance geek angle of mine, I do read or look at Bloomberg, New Energy Finance, or things like that, because I still love the intersection of finance and solar, and you know, so I still love looking at like more the macro trends.
Do you send stuff around to your team when it comes through your inbox?
It doesn't even have to come from me. I actually get way more. We have our Slack channel where there's a solar channel of people posting stuff all the time. So usually it accumulates, and then at the end of the day, I kind of go and get my curated digest.
I love that. See, this is genius. You created your own curation from within your team.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, it wasn't for me. It's for general knowledge, but that's what it turns into.
That's fantastic. Well, similarly, if you've listened to Suncast, you know I believe that readers are leaders and leaders are readers. Is there a book that has particularly impacted your view on the world or your view on leadership?
Ooh. Wow, that's a weighty question. A book that has impacted my view on leadership. Or the world.
Is there a book that you've given away the most?
Yeah, but let me think about this.
Okay. thoughts or
Make
the
it
cause.
into, this didn't make it into the list of things
It's totally
to
fine.
prepare for.
It didn't?
No, but that's good.
Ah.
That's a good one. Which one has influenced my view of the world?
Why don't you take a sip of water while you think about it?
You can also cheat and look behind you.
Did you put these books out?
No, those were there.
Well, one's Good Principles by Adeyemo, for sure.
I've got large scale solar power system design, but that isn't.
That's it. Why don't we take a break here for a second? So principles. So I've asked this of 200 guests on the show. Principles is on the list. Taming the Sun is on the list. Large scale solar power design is actually on the list, believe it or not.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Of books that have.
No, yeah, I've interviewed geeks,
Okay.
of course. How Google Works, also on the list. Let's see, anything else selling through curiosity? No. Unscaled, no. All right, that's about it. Did you get your answer yet?
No, not yet.
Do you give books away?
I do.
Okay, what was the
But
last book you
but
gave
they
away?
aren't. They're more tactical books.
Doesn't matter, it can be tactical.
No, I like.
What's the last book you gave away?
The last book I gave away was something about the complex. Like it was about how to sell. Like it wasn't an inspirational book or.
Well,
something
do you
like
believe that as a leader, it's important to sell?
Yeah, but. Like,
So you gave someone in your team a book on how to sell.
yeah, the person was a salesperson, so I gave them a book on.
Well, typically we
So-
try to keep this running list so that we can
Right.
recommend books to others.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'll tell you this. Many times, there are a lot of very humbling moments in this founder journey. So I remember, I'll never forget this day. I remember one time when we had flown to Los Angeles and we had a couple of meetings and we're out there and we're about to pitch to, this potential customer. And it was late at night and we'd driven halfway across the city and we pitched and it was a great pitch. We threw a demo of the software. We had our decks ready. We showed them all this whiz bang and you can do this and you can do this and you can do that. And went an hour long. And then at the end, okay, so what do you think? You're going to sign up? And he's like, well, I'm going to think about it, but just some feedback. It's like, you might want to read this book. And it was something like, it was something like how to communicate value or something, like how to present like Steve Jobs. And I was like, ouch. So that's one. Another one is we had this great meeting with the team and we're talking about like, okay, this is what we're going to do, our strategy going forward. And then team is awesome and they gave me some reading and it was like something like 100 ways to look smart in meetings. So so I would recommend that.
Okay.
Yeah, go read it. I haven't gotten that feedback since. So
Fantastic.
yeah.
All right. Do you remember one of the key ways that you've learned to look smart in meetings?
Prepare.
Prepare.
Yeah. have answers to questions.
That's good.
Yeah.
What was the toughest
This
question?
wasn't a meeting.
No, and yet I prepared.
Yeah.
What was the toughest question you got asked that you can talk about during the fundraising roadshow? And I'll say, was there one that changed the way you presented to others? Right, so like somebody hit you, maybe it caught you off guard, and it changed the way that you presented to every other VC.
I wouldn't say it was a particular question, but I would say that you have a very short interval of time to hit them with the most important things, right? And so what we had to do was change from telling the narrative and the story of what we're building and everything else, because given the industry that we're in and what we love doing, we started with that and then built up a crescendo. And what we learned very quickly was to hit them with the facts.
Yeah.
Number of customers, number of projects, this, revenue, so on and so forth. And then after you get that out of the way, it's like, now that I got your attention, this is how we're going about it.
Got it.
Right. So, yeah.
That's good.
It's a bit pedestrian, but
Effective. What habit or consistent practice do you feel is giving you the greatest leverage or has had a big impact on your life?
I think that there's several, but one that comes to mind immediately is I think it's really important to be able to dispassionately ingest feedback, right? Not take it personally, right? That's something, and it could be feedback from people, it could be feedback from the markets, it could be feedback from customers, like it doesn't matter, but really like trying as best as possible not to have a stake and just honestly, objectively take feedback is really hard to do. I've literally got down to the point where just to be as disconnected emotionally from it, I stopped saying when I was back in the days trading, I wouldn't say, oh, this was a good day or a bad day, because I didn't want to put any sort of moral or judgment. It was like, oh, this was profitable or unprofitable. Or this was, this bet worked or it didn't work, as opposed to like, this was good or bad. And I think that that's a pretty high leverage thing to do. If you can get to the point where as much as possible, you can remove yourself from having an emotional connection and invite that feedback and try and just process it and, you know, act accordingly. That's been helpful for me and something that I hope, team, you can give me feedback. I hope that I've grown in over the last few years.
Yeah. Yeah, as you're explaining that, I'm thinking of sort of the metaphysical principle of the watcher, right? The ability to watch and observe what's happening as not something that's happening to you, right? And that you need to respond to. It's very cool. For those who aren't here in the office and working for you, how could folks learn more about Aurora? What do you think are like the one or two best ways for them to interact with, engage with the company?
For those who aren't here, clearly our website is a great resource.
The blog is in particular.
I would say the blog in particular, but also on the website, it depends on what you're trying to learn about Aurora. If you're trying to learn about the product and what it can do for you, go to the website. We offer free demonstrations, right? You know, click on that and so
you can sign up for a free demonstration at mysuncast.com. Banner on the homepage.
Oh yeah, actually that's right. Yeah, and on the homepage of this website, you can sign up for a demonstration, or you could go to www.aurorasolar.com and sign up for a demo and one of these awesome sales.
Use the non-existent code Suncast.
If you do use Suncast, you do get a special benefit. So I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say it, but whatever. It's live and you can edit it out after all. But if you do mention Suncast, we have a promotion. You go annual, you get a second license free.
That's right.
So that's a special thing. So take advantage of it while it lasts.
Yes.
Go to www.aurorasolar.com and click sign up for a demo.
You guys active? You're active on Twitter and LinkedIn?
We're active on Twitter, we're active on Facebook, we're active on LinkedIn, and we have our blog as well where we try and produce interesting content. And honestly, just hit me up. I don't have a lot of friends other than my team here, so I'm looking for more friends.
To that end, are you personally on Twitter?
Personally? Well, I'm not very good with it.
No.
Like, I started using it, I realized I was tweeting everybody.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I was trying to tweet Steve Lacy. Like, at Stephen Lacy, and someone came up to me, was like, "Hey, man."
Like, I'm not.
Yeah, I was like, what's the big release that you're trying to tweet to Steve Lacy? I was like, how do you know that? He's like, you tweeted everybody. Yeah. Well, I spend more time on LinkedIn.
Gwen can work with you on how to tweet.
Yes,
so more time on LinkedIn. So direct messages on LinkedIn are useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And you're not? Do you have a process where you're actually accepting connection requests?
Yeah. It's very simple. Accept all of them.
Perfect. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, you've got obviously we've named a couple of things. You've got the ear of some 1,000 or so folks that are going to hear this episode. What ask would you have of the Suncast audience?
These more of a personal ask and then a more general generic ask. From a general generic ask, I would just say that keep in mind that all of us, Suncast, Aurora, our competitors, Most companies in this space, even the biggest companies in this space, are relatively small compared to other industries.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that, in many ways, we're a startup in a startup industry,
Yeah.
right? And what that means is that, like, all the stories that will be written and all the articles and all the narrative is really being driven by what we're doing currently. So there's a big responsibility and privilege. It's very rare for you to be at, the forefront or, at the crest of the type of things that we're doing. If you were doing, this podcast on finance, it would be like, okay, number 1,200,000, and that there's so many of them, right? But like, this is very unique, and this is why we're glad to support it. So for everyone else, just have that implicit set of standards, because before the regulators come on board and everything else, you should have that and always be working to do your best. So that's on that front. And then on a more direct personal front, we do want to hear from you guys.
Yeah.
Like, if you're an Aurora customer, tell us what we're doing well, what we could improve on. If you're not an Aurora customer, tell us why, right? Like, okay, you guys suck at doing this. We need you to build this. We want that. Let us know. The whole like dispassionate feedback loop is something that we try and just, analyze throughout, because at the end of the day, what we want is, to push this industry forward and obviously create a lot of value and earn some for Aurora as a whole and our investors, but ultimately doing that by pushing the whole industry forward.
That was beautifully said. I don't have a selfie with us.
Oh.
So we're going to take that before I
Did you
ask
take
you.
one with Chris? This one
No.
will get more likes.
Let's end today, as we always do, with a bold prediction. What one thing do you see happening? Maybe it's in the market, maybe it's somewhere else that perhaps nobody else is tracking. Sam, what's in your crystal ball?
In my crystal ball, I think that 5 years from now, solar will probably be something like landscaping, right? It won't be a question of like if, it would be more a matter of like who are you going to go with, who's going to do it for you. It wouldn't be such like a unique, crazy, unconventional thing. It would be a question of, are you going to get like the tiles, or are you going to get like the retrofit system?
Yeah.
It's more that
Yeah.
than, whether people at all would be considering that. And I think that will be the case generally across the board. Now, there's a huge housing stock, right? Over 100 million single-family homes, 5.6 million commercial buildings. So I'm not saying all of them would have it, but like, at the forefront of people's homes as they're buying homes, or as they're thinking about like some of their day-to-day like big ticket items, like a kitchen, for example.
Yeah.
I think this will just be part of the natural discourse. And it will move out of this small kind of like bubble we have in the solar industry, and there'll be all these different participants in it. So I think it'll be big.
Well, as folks consider the integration of solar with their kitchen and bathroom remodels, we will certainly be pontificating and covering it here on Suncast. Sam Adeyemo of Aurora Solar is so grateful for the opportunity to be here with you and all of you this evening. Thanks for joining us on this Suncast Live. All right. I don't need a microphone anymore. I don't know if